Welcome, everybody, to our webinar today. I really want to just kind of share some opening remarks here. So, changes in legislation or regulatory requirements in pharmaceutical manufacture can give engineers new challenges. And today in our webinar, we've got 3 engineers who will talk about their experiences of rising to these challenges and the kind of things that they've had to solve, the kind of problem-solving activities both Bob, Richard, and Terry have completed in their careers. Terry, Richard, and Bob have worked in the pharmaceutical industry for, well, I won't say how many years, will I, Bob, Richard, or Terry, because that would be giving away, but plenty of experience to share in this topic area. So Rue and I will be helping to manage your questions, and we really encourage you to ask questions. There's the opportunity in the webinar to put your questions in the chat area, and after Terry, Richard, and Bob have spoken, we will pick up on those questions and have a chance to do our best to answer them as we possibly can. So that's pretty much where we are for kicking off our webinar. Terry, it would be great to hear about the engineering challenge you came across and what was your actions in this area.
Thank you very much, Claire. Let me just share my screen here. So I'm going to talk about regulations and impact on pharmaceutical manufacturing. So I'm going to talk specifically today about serialization. My name is Terry Crawford. I've come to you from the IET today, and I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry for about 24 years now. So just quick overview of what serialization is, if you haven't heard of it. It's about putting a unique code on every unit of a prescription pack for when you get to the pharmacy. And the reason why we do that is so we can then track and trace the product from manufacture to the last sales point. So this is been enacted by governments around the world for anti-counterfeiting and reimbursement fraud measures. So when do we serialize? That depends on the country you're producing for, and we'll look at that in a minute. And how do we serialize? So this is where the engineering part comes in, around printer and vision technology that is required, and also there's even standards in here about the quality of this printing. So that provides its own challenge. And who has to serialize? This is the market authorization holders, so the manufacturers of the drugs at point of manufacture. And for some markets, it's also about when ownership changes of the drugs will also have an impact to serialization. So what is it? It's about putting a unique code on every sales pack. This code typically, although it's different in some countries, have a global trade item number, which identifies that class of product, a serial number, which identifies then that specific pack, an expiry date, and a batch number, which you normally see in a human readable. And then also when we look at bundles and shipper cases and pallets, it's typically a GTIN and a serial number, or a serialized shipper container code, as you can see in the normal 1D barcodes. So this top left here, the square barcode, is what we typically see in Europe and the US. This linear barcode, this 1D barcode that looks like a picket fence, that's a China-specific barcode print that they wanted. And then the big guy, which is almost like 4 quadrants of a 2D barcode, that's what we had to print for Russia, because again, they had unique requirements that nobody else had. So again, still talking about what serialization is and why we do it. There's different flavors of serialization. So there's point of dispense, or what we call PODA. So this is what's happened in Europe, where before the pharmacist gives you the pack, they scan the barcode and the system tells them if that's a good pack to give to the patient. And together, certainly in Europe, you also have the tamper evident measures, which means the plaque is glued or taped down somehow so you can tell if it's been tampered with. And it's all about giving the patient the confidence that the product is genuine. E-pedigree is it's not a term we see nowadays, but it's about chain of custody. So recording who owns the pack as it's bought and sold through the distribution network. This is more like what the US does. So the US is based on this format. And then there's track and trace. This is typically identified with a national database that is getting updates at all times from when the product is manufactured. It gets recorded in the database. When it changes hands of the wholesaler or the pharmacy, it's all going back to typically a government database to do the serial number status updates. So why do we serialize? Again, it's World Health Organization, 1 in 10 medicinal products in low and medium income countries is considered substandard or falsified. At one point in 2017, it says 35% of all counterfeit drugs found are made in India. So that's a particular country, and it's one of the countries that have had a real focus on implementing serialization in the past couple of years. And there's various stories about how substandard or counterfeit drugs have led to deaths in many countries. And it's also a big market. I think it's after drugs, guns, and art, pharmaceuticals, I think is the next biggest problem, according to Interpol. So just to answer the question of when to serialize. So it really became a thing around about 2004 when California created something called the e-pedigree law, which was the idea that all products going into California as a state had to be uniquely identified. But because of the way the US market is, it meant every product going to the US had to be serialized. So California played with this law for a couple of years. It was enacted, but never formally made actual law. And then eventually it was superseded by the Drug Supply Chain Securities Act in 2013, which covered the whole of the US. There was many iterations during this period of different state and federal laws. And then finally, it's actually November 2023 when the full track and trace implementation in the US market actually goes live, where every drug in the US has to be uniquely identifiable and tracked through its e-pedigree as it changes hands in every point in the supply chain. It was actually, although California started the discussion, and that led to many pilots by pharmaceutical companies, it was actually Turkey that went live first with a full track and trace regulation in 2008. And then closely followed by China. Again, both Turkey and China are a market where there's a national database, and it gives the health authority the ability to track where products have been and to trace where they are now. So that's the idea of a national database. The real, I guess, big market on here was the European Union Falsified Medicines Directive, which went live in February 2019. So in Europe, every pack is uniquely identified, and the status of that serial number in the database is updated when it's dispensed to a patient. And there's other markets, as we can see, and still, as we look forwards, there are other markets still coming, especially Far East. And also should be in here somewhere, Saudi Arabia, and actually a lot of the Middle East is now covered as well. So to the engineering part, how do we get this unique serial number that can be scanned at every point in the supply chain, at least until the end of the expiry date of the product? So this meant at the time a complete refresh really of how we online print batch expiry, because we now have to print the product code, and we also have to print a unique serial number on each pack. So embossing, hot foil stamping, continuous inkjet, these types of technologies weren't suitable for online printing. So this is typically what you see now in a pharmaceutical site is Volky with their HP inkjet cartridge system, thermal inkjet printer, quite a nice compact system, can run quite quickly as well. So that's predominantly what you will see. If you're a company that does more laser etching, then there are many companies, Domino, Markham, that do laser printing. Depending on the size of the print and how fast you go, will then equate into the power of the laser that you need to buy, which then equates into the cost of the thing. But then also we have to think about the bundle and the shipper case and the pallet labels. So we see thermal transfer printers also required to be able to print a unique label each time. So we're having to move from older technology that's set up once at the beginning of the batch to replacing that with printers that are able to update the print on every carton, no matter what speed your line's running at. So along with the printing technology that had to be integrated into the packaging lines, we also had to inspect that. So there was also a big upgrade required in terms of the inspection of those packs. So instead of inspecting with hot foil stamp, you could do batch and expiry, and you could do it as a sampling regime. That doesn't work when every pack is unique. So you have to implement vision inspection technologies. So this top off, just a couple of companies, half a dozen companies mentioned that probably take up quite a bit of the market in serialization inspection, where they are looking at every pack at the pack line speed. So there's another piece of technology we have to, as an engineering, have to then implement inside the machine, or in actual fact, what typically happened was the machine that's responsible for carton printing had to be built. We had to buy a new one. That's certainly what it meant for my company, is we had to replace a lot of equipment with this printing and vision inspection technology built in. And because this is based on standards, and these standards are mentioned quite a lot in regulations, there's something about the quality of the print. Now, you can't do an ISO check of the quality of the print online because the standard doesn't account for that. So typically you'd have to do an offline sampling regime. So there's another bunch of technology of offline barcode verifiers that you have to integrate into your process to make sure that you're printing to the quality that's expected to regulation. So some of the things we had to think about, so this is kind of like the process that we went through, certainly my company. So understanding the regulations, not every market is the same, not every printing requirements are the same. There's the business case. Return on investment is kind of not really the thing here, because it's about license to operate. It's being able to continue to supply that market. In my company, this was a £170 million project. Half of that money was for the equipment, the new equipment or the upgrades to the equipment, to be able to implement these new technologies online. There's things about selecting your vendors, because this is not something you can build in-house, even in big companies. Then the build, we went through building a test lab environment of a packaging line to be able to test out new inks, new cartons. We have to think about artwork, the board that the cartons are made of. So these are all the drying time of the ink. So these are all engineering problems to solve. So we worked on that for about a year before we actually had something, a package to be able to deploy it into a production environment. And then deployment, we had nearly 200 packaging lines in our company to do. So we've for sure standardized the whole approach of, okay, this is the equipment we're going to buy. These are the models. These are the vendors we're going to buy. For the printing system, we're going to buy this model. For the vision inspection, we're going to buy this model, so we can be able to put in a standard process for every packaging site to work to, just because we had so much to do in so little time. And then the support, putting in the support model in place to support all of this hardware and the software part. There's many layers of software I haven't talked about today, because we just want to look at the engineering part. So the life cycle management of that, even to the level of equipment. So whereas you may have bought a piece of secondary packaging equipment and used it for 20, 30 years, we're even seeing a life cycle in equipment now, never mind the printing or the vision technology. Even equipment now has a life cycle. As more markets come on, they have slightly different requirements, or we need to run the line slightly quicker. There's always, and as we move, certainly as we move further eastwards in the world, and our local manufacturing sites in the Middle and Far East, we have to worry about the cost of the equipment. So that's also a consideration. And serialization as an entirety, as I've said, has many aspects to it, including the artwork, the engineering, the procurement, the quality, validation, IT, cybersecurity, and business process. Probably one of the most important parts of how to integrate all of this. And so that's my part. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Terry. That's great to get a really good picture there on serialization. I think now we'll move next to Richard. So if you would like to share your regulatory challenges that you've faced up to as an engineer in pharmaceutical manufacture.
Yes, thank you, Claire, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I think, and thank you, Terry, for that very excellent overview of serialization. By way of introduction, my name is Richard Coe. I'm a chartered mechanical engineer by original profession. For whatever reasons, I'm now heavily involved in the pharmaceutical industry, and my lofty job title now is responsible person and responsible person import. My wife quite happily falls around laughing when I share that with anybody, because she says you're certainly not responsible at home, but that's between us. And I think in relation to what I'm going to say, the title of responsible person has come about as a result of a regulatory change. I think that, and fundamentally, regulatory changes occur because we have an underlying duty of care within the pharmaceutical industry to provide medicines that are both safe in their own right and also are safe for administration to patients. So that in itself is the fundamental driver, and the regulations exist to make sure that we do that. So in essence, the regulations are constantly evolving. When I was originally asked to present here, we were thinking quite hard, what examples could we bring forward? And obviously Terry has plumped for EU Falsified Medicines Directive and so on, which was a good example of a regulatory change. There are many others. In my world, I'm particularly interested in what we call good distribution practice, which is a whole set of regulations that govern the way that we store and distribute medicines. And those regulations have evolved over the years, but principally they became They became law in 2013 in the EU GDP legislation, which brought about a legal expectation to demonstrate that we can store and distribute medicines within label limits. So in essence, that is the problem, if you like. So that's a regulatory change that has actually posed a problem, and the pharma industry obviously has to respond to that. And the principal way that they respond to it is to hand it to the engineers. So because with anything like this, we have to demonstrate that we're dealing with the problem, because the other factor that exists in our world, and I think for the non-pharma attendees in the webinar, this is very, very akin to health and safety regulations, in the sense that health and safety is designed to protect people from harm, and the regulations in the pharma industry are pretty much doing the same sort of thing. They're designed to protect people, i.e. the patients, from harm. So whenever we get a regulatory change, fundamentally it produces, this is a problem in the description of this webinar. So faced with that, companies who need to comply with the regulation also need to demonstrate that they do that. So we can ask how they do that. That then passes to project teams within companies, but almost inevitably that project team will involve engineers of some description. I know Terry might describe himself as a software engineer. I might describe myself as a packaging engineer. I'd also describe myself as a quality engineer. I think basically it brings together engineers as a team to solve the problem. And I think this is the impact it has, or our response to it, is to form this team that then deals with the problem. So what do we do as engineers? What do we do as a team? I think the first thing we do, we view it, a regulatory change is initially viewed perhaps as a threat, because there's a good possibility that we will be, if we can't demonstrate that we're meeting the regulation, we will ultimately the company will be shut down, but it will certainly be involved in deficiencies with the inspectorate. Again, there's a parallel there with the health and safety industry, in the sense that if you don't do things safely and you're inspected, you might get your site shut down. So what we would do is turn that into an opportunity. Any threat can be viewed as an opportunity, and the way we then solve that is to understand what the opportunity is, and for the most part, it's an opportunity to generally to improve our processes, the way we do things. We need to demonstrate it, so we'll always document it, and a way we can do that is to implement a process which will deal with the impact of the regulatory change. again, Terry described the process that they went through to develop new packaging, new printing techniques. They had to understand the problem in the first instance. They had new packaging techniques. There was equipment developed specifically to deal with it. And then there was the, he mentioned at the end, the testing phase. And that's really where I come into, or myself and others like me come into this process, in that we have to demonstrate to the regulators that we satisfy the regulations, or at least, and certainly have done something to meet the regulatory changes. So I think the point I'm making here is that any regulatory change we can view as an opportunity, and we can implement basically a team effort, bring together engineers who've got the right skills and knowledge, because inevitably it's a multidisciplinary challenge. So we bring together the right people to do it, and we would then design the process by which we can demonstrate this compliance. So we would generally apply a logical scientific knowledge analysis. So we have to understand the problem, and then we would come up with a solution, and then we would then validate the solution through a process, through typically quality risk management. So we would again look at the various scenarios around it, and to determine whether what we're doing is correct. So this is, as I said, this is a constantly evolving. There are constantly evolving regulatory changes, and it's good, I think, to view any regulatory change as this opportunity to improve, and a good excuse, if we need one, to get people together to come up with innovative solutions. So in terms of specifics, I've sort of looked at various changes in the GDP legislation. I mentioned the 2013 regulation, which brought in the requirement for the responsible person. So, an impact of that, if you like, was that it created my job title, for one thing. It brought in this focus on quality risk management. So I think as engineers generally, we can look to that as a good tool to use in any environment. If you always apply the thinking of quality and put it together with risk management, then you will inevitably, I think, come up with a more robust solution. So our legislation in the UK is cast into the rules and guidance for pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors, commonly known as the Green Guide. That was updated in 2017, again to introduce more rigorous emphasis on quality risk management, and it's been updated last year in 2022 with actually far more guidance on how we should meet the regulations. Terry mentioned the introduction of EU FMD and all the implications of that specifically. current regulatory changes which affect us, not only the pharma industry, but everybody who's importing, exporting, particularly to or from or through Northern Ireland, are the Brexit uncertainties. We've been having to run to keep up with all that, and it's again just recently changed with the brackets almost agreement of the Northern Ireland Protocol finally. So I think just in closing, I'd probably just mention, because in my past I've been involved with good manufacturing practice as well. Sort of elements that we might look at there. This is perhaps more for the pharmaceutical people looking in. We've introduced in biologics, we've introduced single-use technologies. So that brings about major changes in equipment and container design and testing, major redesign of process. It leads to, for example, changes or improvements in clean and sterile piping coupling technologies. Okay, and that's something that applies across a lot of other industries as well as pharmaceuticals. We've had the obviously the introduction of COVID vaccines, and the impact of that is that it's an example of an innovative change that's now reducing the time to market for pharmaceuticals, but it also brings its challenges for us. It poses a problem in how do we introduce equipment more quickly, new processes more quickly, and do the testing on that that's required. And currently there's also then the update to the GMP Orange Guide, Annex 1, which is specifically around the manufacture of sterile biologic products. Again, that's also very much involved in the production of, for instance, the COVID vaccines. So I think that's pretty much what I was wanted to put across. So just to summarize, it's the fact that whenever we get regulatory change, it initially poses perhaps a threat to us, but engineers can solve that by turning it into an opportunity and working on it with a collective grouping of their scientific knowledge. So I think it's probably enough of me waffling on. So I'll thank you very much.
Hey, I like that. The fact that what initially might be seen as a challenge for engineers is a really good opportunity. So thank you for what you've shared around your experiences, particularly in good distribution practice. We've had serialization from Terry about that kind of engineering technical challenge. Hey, Bob, what challenge that came your way in pharmaceutical manufacturing became an opportunity for you, Bob?
This was many years ago. I'm wondering why I can't see myself on screen, Claire.
We can see you, Bob, so don't worry.
That's all right. That's all right. Good. Okay, so this was a long time ago. I graduated in engineering in 1979, and this wasn't very long after I graduated. So although Claire was being discreet in saying how long each of us have been in the industry, in my case it's over 40 years. And fairly recently, I ran SeerPharma UK for many years, but I retired a couple of years ago after I sold the business. This one goes back to my early days in a company called Upjohn, place in Crawley, small site, where we had a variety of different products, and there were some quite interesting ones there. And what I'll try to do is to share a screen just to bring this presentation to life, because we were facing the introduction of child-resistant packaging. As I say, it's the early 80s, probably about 81, something like that. And it's fairly important because, as you'll see from this comment from Stephen Wilkins of the Child Safe Packaging Group, that it's a major issue in terms of the reduction of child poisoning in the developed world, because kids, given the chance, will eat medicinal tablets because they think they're sweets. And parents obviously don't always know they've eaten them until it's too late and there's something seriously wrong. So, child-resistant packaging. Now, we had a couple of products which fell into the bracket of could do significant harm if children ate them. One was called Haleon, which was a sleeping tablet, and the other one was called Xanax, which was an antidepressant. They were small tablets, plastic bottle, simple screw cap, about 30 tablets in the bottle usually, and a wad of cotton wool. So it's a very light pack. It worked well. We had them running down the conventional packaging line, so they went through a bottle filler. I think it was a King's slack counter, as I remember, then through a capping machine, probably a Dico, through a labeler, which you can see top left there, ppms in those days, and then through an over wrapper, which was simply a stretch wrap. This particular line didn't have cartoning and leaflet insertion on it because we were sending the products out as a bulk pack to another plant for final packaging. It was working fine. It had been going very well for a number of years. But then we had the child-resistant closure was introduced, which was something of the sort you can see on the top left, where you have to press down hard to engage the clutch in the cap to make the cap unscrew, and it needs a certain amount of strength to do it. They're quite heavy, and unfortunately that made the whole pack very top heavy, a bit like this chap on his tricycle. Quite how he can manage to navigate this thing, I'm not sure. But the consequence was, when you put a very heavy cap onto a very light bottle with very few tablets and a little bit of cotton wool in it, they want to do this, they want to stand on their head. So we had a big problem with bottles going down the line. They'd come out of the labelling machine, they'd come out of the filling machine okay, on a nice flat conveyor belt. That wasn't a problem. They went through the capping machine where this big heavy cap was put on, and that's when the problem started, because they would tend to tip over. They wouldn't go all the way over, they'd lie on their side, and of course if you put a bottle on its side into the scrolling feed on the labelling machine, then the thing's going to jam up solid. So we would put an operator on the line to make sure that if any bottles did fall over, then the operator would stand them back up again. They'd go through the labeler would get put on, label complete with the overprint, and they'd come out the other end of the labeler towards the overwrapper machine, and the same problem would occur. If there's any unevenness on the belt, which it often was, the bottles would fall over. So we had another operator, or maybe we'd get the same operator and keep her very busy, standing the bottles up before they went into the overwrapper, in the hopes that we get a complete wrap out of however many it was, before we actually got to the final packing off into the shipping case. Well, that was an interesting challenge, because obviously somebody had decided to order new parts for the capping machine, but nobody had actually thought through about this whole process of what was going to happen. It was a simple risk assessment, I guess, if you will, referring back to the comment Richard made. Being the new young graduate, engineering degree behind me and full of enthusiasm, I got stuck into this one and thought, well, hang on. If these things want to stand on their head, a bit like this guy in his chair reading his book upside down, why don't we just do that? So the solution was to contract a firm who are called Hills of Hull. They're still in existence. Their chap came down, we spoke to him about it, spent a bit of time with him, and it was a very easy solution. They machined a spiral inverter, which simply fitted on the conveyor belt downstream of the capper, and as soon as the bottles came out of the capper, they were captured in this spiral inverter and simply turned on their head. So the bottle was now standing on its cap to go down the packaging line, through the labeler and through the overwrapper, and we never had another problem with the bottle tipping. Obviously, it's easy enough to label a bottle upside down, the same as it is to overwrap it upside down. I couldn't find a video of a bottle inverter, so I have one here of a can inverter. So I'll just show you what the principle is, and it is so simple. So that's what we did. We had this little PTFE spiral inverter put on the line downstream of the capper, problem solved. Now, I think I've got a few more minutes. So as I have, I'll just jump in with a very quick solution. If I can move on from that's the one I wanted. This wasn't a regulatory issue, but it was just an interesting little story. We had a product which was an acne lotion. It was a suspension, and it was produced in the manufacturing department, and they used to get this stuff into suspension. I think they probably had to sell some mixture of some sort, which would stir this up. And then they transfer it into a GRP filling vessel which had a stirrer at the bottom, and it has some baffle plates on the side. There are actually 4 of them. Now, what happened was we would get assay results which were outside spec towards the end of the batch. So the last 1,000 or so bottles off the batch often failed assay on strength. So we were throwing a lot of product away. Again, another little challenge. Well, if you look at the layout of this thing and you think about how it works, it was creating a vortex in the vessel. And these lines are equal pressure. Now, obviously, the surface of the liquid is going to be atmospheric pressure, and you're going to get pressure gradients down through the vessel. And obviously, the closer to the bottom of the vessel you get, the higher the pressure, because you've got the dynamic head as well as the atmospheric pressure on top of the liquid. And the increasing pressure actually moves down in terms of the pressure in the liquid down to the bottom corners of the vessel. Any solids, and it was a suspension, so basically a liquid that was full of solids, will want to sink through gravity, but they will also want to, through their buoyancy, get to the point of minimum pressure. So what the solids will do is they'll tend to migrate to the centre of the bottom of the vessel. Now, if you want to try this, put some sand in a bucket of water and stir it fairly vigorously, and you'll end up with a little pile of sand in the middle. And if you've got one of those above ground swimming pools, those circular ones, and you want to get the muck out of it, get a couple of your mates and walk round in circles until you build up a bit of a vortex, and you'll find all the muck will congregate in the centre of the vessel, in the centre of the pool. And this is what was happening. This vessel would be on stir, and we would basically stir the suspension into the centre here. And as the outfeed to the filling machine was there, the first few thousand bottles of the batch run would be a bit rich in the amount of active ingredient. And as we got towards the end of the batch run, because we stirred the actives out of it, we were getting a very weak liquor. The solution, again, was a fairly straightforward one. We were never going to get a new vessel. I did say, well, it needs to have a new vessel. But they said, no, we're not going to do that. Forget it. So we did this instead. What I did was to get a pump, and we take the fluid out the bottom of the vessel, pump it up to a hopper. And from the hopper, there would be 2 outlets. One would be to the filler, but the other one would be an overflow back into the vessel at the top. I can't remember the exact specifications of the pump, but it was a number of times the rate at which product was being taken out to the filler. 10 times, 20 times, I don't remember exactly. But the concept was that if we're getting a rich liquor at the bottom, we take it out and put it back in at the top, we're helping to re-homogenise the mixture. Anything that's coming into this hopper at the top here would be fairly consistent. So that's where we would take the drain out into the filling machines, the fill to the filling machine. And lo and behold, it worked. It was a very simple and easy solution. It was a bit Heath Robinson, but sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. And that solved a problem. We stopped scrapping product.
Bob, hey, thank you so much. Those are 2 very cool little examples of engineering problems in day-to-day life. And I think now you've got me thinking in my head with that spiral inverter. If the bottle wants to stay upside down, let it. I love that thinking.
Absolutely.
Hey, well now, thank you to our 3 speakers. The great news is we have questions in the chat for you. So people are very keen to ask a few questions. So maybe, Suru, do you want to read out the question from Laura Granger, please?
Yeah, so I can see 2 questions in the chat box. So question from Laura. Hi, Terry. How is quality ensured with the updates to serialization?
Right. Yeah, well, thank you for the question. So because serialization is a regulatory requirement on the pack, just like putting a batch and expiry, it makes the whole process and all the systems connected to it GXP, or good manufacturing practice specifically. So from there, it's as GAMP5 tells us, we take a risk-based approach to then the validation of the first iteration of that system, whether it's a piece of the software, the vision system, the printer, the equipment, and which is why in our case, building a test lab with a full packaging line in it really paid for itself, because we could do all of that work offline and print trials and all that kind of stuff, and testing the software, go through software life cycles, because you can't with all of this, software goes through life cycles quite often. So our serialization software stack changes probably every 2 years in our company, just to keep up with to date with the latest security standards and operating system standards and vendor support. And so, yeah, it's just about following the validation life cycle. And that includes at the equipment, right? If you make a change to the equipment, you risk assess the impact, and then test according to that. So hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you, Terry. Unfortunately, I can't really let you go as yet because there is a second question also for you. So a question from Louise, also for serialization. Is there or will there be in the foreseeable future a requirement to add serialization code or stamp to the actual product? For example, the vial or the blister pack or the sachet and etc., as well as the bundle ship pack case. If so, this will be a challenge for something as small as a 10 ml vial, for example.
Yep. So primary pack serialization has been talked about in the industry a good 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, 10 years even. And for sure, it's a challenge. On blister pack, normally on a blister machine, you have 300 millimeter wide. That's a lot of surface area to cover if you're going to serialize every blister, which might only be 100 wide, 100 millimeters wide. Some people, especially for things like hospital packs, even want the individual pocket serialized. So again, there's the engineering problem about the printing technology first, and then the vision technology, and then how that's integrated with the machine. I was involved in a previous company. I was involved in trials of laser etching the Schlock vials. So you could uniquely serialize, but then you have to check what does the regulation trying to do. So is it so you can identify that vial in the world, which is obviously quite a big challenge, or just that vial within a batch because there's a label on the vial that will give it its product name. And so, in fact, when our trials of laser etching vials actually showed us it's actually better to do it when the vial is still warm when it's made. But then you have to read it, obviously. So again, new technologies, very expensive laser etchers, because if you want to run them at a good speed, and then the vision system to then read it. Countries have been talking about it. As manufacturers, we've always tried to bring a bit of realism in our feedback to say, okay, the technology, however, is not very mature, which makes the technology expensive, which will make the cost of goods more expensive. And as a market, can that be supported? Especially for some markets where the cost of the drugs are government regulated. So all things to take into consideration. It's coming, in essence, but hopefully not yet.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I can see there are 2 more questions being added, one from Kirk and one from Lewis. But given that it's probably a following question from Lewis, so I wonder if you can pick up this one first. So you quote GAMP5 and GMP and etc. Does ASTM 2500 risk-based approach apply too?
I'm going to have to claim ignorance here. I don't actually know what ASTM 2500 is. For sure, in the GMP regulations, GAMP5, in Annex 11 of the European regulation for the supply of pharmaceutical drugs. If you look at the US regulations, 21 CFR Part 11 talks about serialization. But again, in the US, there's also guidance, but actually you have to follow it from the Healthcare Distribution Alliance. because of the commercial model they have in the supply chain in the US. So there's always lots of things you have to consider. So yes, it's pretty much a full-time job just considering the regulations and the standards you need to follow.
Can I chip in just on ASTM 2500? It was
Please.
a quality standard that was introduced many years ago now, and it was really a bit of a nudge to the pharmaceutical industry to say, look, you can do it better if you start looking at quality in a more structured way. Whether it triggered the FDA into action or not, I'm not quite sure, but the risk-based approach very much followed on, and I think, to be fair, 2500 has fallen by the wayside in the pharmaceutical industry because it's been superseded by ICH Q9.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and
Yeah.
GAN5,
which is
everybody's the risk-based.
Yeah, and that's part of European and US regulations and guidance.
Yeah, I can probably chip in there as well because as Bob rightly says, the ASTM E2500 was an attempt to or brought in a risk-based approach to the qualification and validation of pharmaceutical systems, and I think this links quite nicely to Laura's question about how is quality ensured, because that also links to basically to my job as the RP is to ensure that these systems are fully qualified and that they don't pose any risk to product quality or safety, which involves can involve an enormous amount of testing. So coming back to the ASTM 2500 was an attempt to reduce the amount of testing, but it was leveraging what we call good engineering practice. So in essence, it said that, well, if you design this properly and you construct it and install it and test it or commission it in accordance with what we call good engineering practice, i.e., leverage the knowledge and skills of the engineers involved, then ultimately you will be able to say, well, that system is functioning correctly. All we need to do is just now test the actual compliance aspects of it. So it then you can focus all your test effort into the compliance parts. The compliance ones being the way the regulations are written. So it's a way of reducing the qualification effort, but also to focus on the best bits, so to speak, the important bits.
Yeah, I think thank you both of you, and Terry and Richard. So Richard, there is a question from Kirk for you. What do you think are some of biggest challenges that are facing pharma in terms of upcoming regulatory changes?
And maybe not just for you, Richard. I think that's a great question
Yeah.
to all our panel as a finishing moment, Suru, if you think the same.
Yeah.
Great.
I think so, yeah.
Well, yeah, briefly, so I won't hog the limelight, but briefly I mentioned the current changes to GMP Annex 1, which are designed to push manufacturers of sterile products into I would describe it as a greater degree of compliance. So what that will do is turn, or gives us as engineers, it gives us the opportunity to turn a risk assessment where we perhaps justify not doing something, but into a risk assessment where we justify doing something but bringing in significant improvements to the process. So again, it's just the illustration of turning threat into an opportunity. And aside from that, I think there'll be there will be upcoming challenges for us in terms of sustainability and CO2 reduction. Certainly in distribution, it can be an extremely carbon heavy activity. We use an awful lot of non-recyclable packaging. So again, we'll be driven down the sustainability route, and we can introduce innovative distribution techniques to deal with that. But again, it will be ultimately driven by the balance between sustainability and carbon reduction regulations and the actual pharma regulations themselves. Over to someone else.
Yeah. So anything, Terry, Bob, you want to add?
Yeah, I think that's a good one in terms of the regulatory part, and building on top of that, and like the carbon reduction, the sustainability, which are obviously big topics for most companies. And I think on top of that will become more regulation around data integrity, and the capture of data from more and more systems, as part of your batch record for pharmaceuticals. So one, you want to do it because you want to reduce your carbon footprint and improve your sustainability score, and worry about energy security. But two, I think the regulators will ask for more of that information in support of that batch release process.
I think perhaps I can just add that throughout my career, I've seen the industry collect a lot of data, but generally it's not that good at turning data into information. When you've got information, you can start to make decisions. If all you've got is just a big heap of numbers, then you've just got a big heap of numbers. The ASTM 2500 was mentioned, and Richard talked about this coming into validation. It's very much been absorbed into the FDA's guidance on process validation, and I'm a huge fan of the FDA's guidance documents. I think extremely well written, and you don't have to be regulated by the FDA to read them. So if you're looking for a good source of free advice, have a look at the FDA. The other thing I would just like to say is if you are coming to Making Pharmaceuticals in Coventry in April, we will have a stand there. Most of the people you've seen today will be there, and we'd love to see you in person.
Very good, thank you. I think we're almost out of time, so maybe Shrew, would you like to just summarize and take us to the finish, please?
Oh yes, I think it's been a great session. So big thank you to all three presenters, Terry, Bob, and Richard. I think the key point from here is hopefully, as everyone else is seeing, as I see, that the regulatory environment for the pharma industry is constantly evolving. It presents obviously risks and challenges, but also that can be great opportunities. So very often team efforts are needed, with engineers can play a big part in it. So some examples, as Terry mentioned, the serialization, engineers doing the design, the review, the assessment, the deployment. And as Richard mentioned, how engineers can help from good distribution practice point of view. And also the two brilliant examples Bob mentioned, the bottle inverter, and also the introduction of the recirculating pumps. So those are the clever design and the solutions that the engineers can really bring to business and to the industry in response to the regulatory changes. And I think, yeah, so good questions as well, from the audience. And so, yeah, thank you very much for everyone attending. I think it's been a great session.